Hell, you do. This is primarily an update on some optimizations that I've made since my previous video. The previous video showcasing an Afflictions and Gas build that you could also switch between that and a Chromatic Influence Exalted Blade build without having to change your emissive color or Archon Shards or anything like that. There's two primary changes that I was able to make, and sort of get into both of these in some more detail, and then sort of generally showcase the rest of the build since it's mostly the same. There's only one or two other differences. With especially one quality of life or simplicity upgrade that you can make, or swap that you can make between this Gas Afflictions build and a slight variation of it. We'll get into that. So the thing that I was primarily trying to fix is I don't like Nourish. I really don't want to have to use Nourish, not only for the fact that it doesn't give you the sort of the feature of the mobility that Wrathful Advance does, which if you've seen any of my gameplay or my build guides that I've shown gameplay in, I use that quite a lot, and I found myself using Nourish kind of missing having that mobility, and also the fact that Wrathful Advance just gives an absurd damage increase to both Slash Dash and Exalted Blade at the same time, and you're equipped melee. Yeah, it doesn't benefit the Ichors, which is something that I still run on this. This is still powerful, but in comparison to something like Nourish, but at that point it doesn't matter. Your strength, all of your bonuses are so high, it really doesn't matter. So that's the primary difference in terms of changing the subsume. So then both of the builds, both this Gas Afflictions build and my Influence Chromatic Blade build, use Wrathful Advance subsumed over Radial Blind or Howl, whichever one. And the only variation between this, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, some quality of life change that you can make. So if you don't want to run, like let's say you're in standard Steel Path content, or you just don't like running a Furious Javelin, you just don't want to have to maintain it. This really isn't necessary for most content. So I've been testing this a lot last day mostly, and seeing, okay, so how necessary is this for Slash Dash to be able to kill targets? And it's really not. So if you do get rid of this, like let's say you want to get rid of Furious Javelin and you want to run no augments, you're not running Influence, you're not running augments on Excalibur, which is a pretty amazing thing to be able to do, then you can run Furious Javelin. And one of the things to know, and I can't showcase this on Umbra like I usually can because I need to polarize him, and I'm kind of waiting until I hit XP cap on him, the like 1 billion XP. I'm just waiting to do that. And August comes around and get double XP, that'll be nice. But let's say you don't want to have to deal with this, and you don't want to run Warrior's Rest, and you want to be able to run Prime Sure-Footed with Naramon. So this is a less of a quality of life upgrade for Prime, for Excalibur Prime, but it is, I would say, a huge quality of life upgrade for anyone who's playing Umbra, which is probably going to be most people. So if you get rid of that augment, you increase your strength, which increases the base damage of Exalted Blade, and it really just sends it to the moon. So this is without having the approximate 10 stacks of Arcane Impetus and Bolt Augmented fully stacked up, which from my experience in this setup with this base 331% strength, you're getting into like 450% strength pretty reliably, and that's on top of Wrathful Advance, which is going to scale really well with strength, just like base damage on Exalted. I'd give them a shot, see which one you like. If you're playing Umbra and you have Prime Sure-Footed, then I would say this. The reason why you cannot run, where you can get rid of Warrior's Rest if you're not running Furious Javelin, is like this would be the most significant reason why his passive would break your active abilities. Because think about with this build, like let's say you're running Umbra, Prime Sure-Footed, you have it to where it's decasting, in this case, only Wrathful Advance, and at a little less than 13-second duration, you're pretty much casting this every time you're about to Slash Dash anyways. Probably casting this quite a lot. You have enough energy with how efficient this build gets. And with the other change that we'll talk about here in a moment, that allows you to maintain your energy pool very reliably. The outside of like, you don't get enough impetus stacks while you're in an energy reduction sortie, which is something I do actually control my builds around, where you only have like 150 max. This helps that as well, because you don't really have to cast Radial Javelin. And then to sort of conclude this, so because we're not running Chromatic Blade, you still get the IPS damage from Exalted Blade while you're slash dashing. So then you'll get the stacks for impact and puncture as well. without having to rely on like something already applying that and then sort of adding those 6 stacks with afflictions to be able to proc an Arcane Impetus stack. So, this is something that I almost forgot about. Archon Flow is another variation that I made to this build. So I guess there's really 3 major things that I changed on this build, and there's a reason why this is here and why this is important. Go back, what I was alluding to is the Archon Shard. This is a thing that I was testing. I kind of slept on this for a long time. I don't know why I hadn't tested this effectively before, but the effectiveness of of energy orbs Archon Shard versus like equilibrium ones is just massive. I don't know what it is. I feel like at some point equilibrium kind of got nerfed in some way. I don't know, but it was probably about a month ago. It seemed like equilibrium didn't perform as well as Arcane Energize, which felt like it didn't perform well at some point. So I don't know if there's anything on the back end of the coding that's been changed or if that's just a placebo effect, but I'll tell you for certain, having 2 of these Archon Shards, unless you're just wasting energy like crazy, you're not like just going ridiculous with it, these are more than enough solo missions and short missions for you to be able to maintain your energy economy. Same with this, the same casting speed. This is necessary for a few reasons. You don't want to go more than this because then you break Slash Dash's momentum, and then your 2 crit damage. So yeah, we get 1 less crit damage Archon Shard, but in comparison, we're getting a lot more strength and a lot more uptime. So it sort of balances out to be, I would say, overall better, especially for the fact that, yeah, you lose. Not having to run Nourish, you're getting far more crit damage overall because of the crit tier. Instead of like kind of getting yellow crits reliably, you're now just into the absolute moon. You're talking 500% crits. So this is what I've been running for some time now. I haven't tested this at level cap to see how effective without running Furious Javelin, but I would probably err on the safe side. If you're running a level cap mission, just run Furious Javelin. You'll probably have enough energy economy to make use of Radial Javelin. Even like a Steel Path Void Cascade, but I'd play around with them. So getting into Archon Flow. So because we're relying on energy orbs to maintain our energy economy, the problem with Archon Flow is that it doesn't proc off cold. Like let's say if you slash dash to a target, that target's got cold on them from whatever source, and you up those stacks, that doesn't count as enemies killed by cold ability. But all you have to do in order to be able to reliably proc this is add a 60/60 mod to give you cold damage on Exalted Blade. This alone codes it as like cold ability and allows that to proc, and it procs reliably. It procs far more than I would expect. You can actually see the cooldown of it. It'll show up in the top right. I'll demonstrate that in gameplay. That this does proc, and then you also get a more reliable source of cold. Cold's probably one of the harder ones to get, since the other way of getting it without having primaries or secondaries is through Momentous Bond. The other change that I made to this is because we changed Archon Shards for both these builds, both my Chromatic Influence and this build both use Duplex Bond. The only difference between them for the Smeda modding is Momentous, and then also the type of element that we use. This is so that we can try to proc more electric. This might not matter as much with Nourish, the fact that we're not using Nourish, since proccing the electric was really useful. It's far easier to proc electric for Arcane Impetus because of the way it works with magnetic. But let's see. So let's say you were playing this with Umbra. I was alluding to this earlier. You don't have to run Warrior's Rest if you're running Transient Fortitude, because you're not running Furious Javelin, which the other quality of life aspect of that, if you're running Prime Sure-Footed, you don't have to rely on something like Unaru to prevent knockdown. So this build exactly you could copy on Umbra just fine. I unfortunately haven't been able to test that. Like I mentioned before, I have to polarize him. I have this sort of like halfway modding configuration for him, just to at least be able to lightly test it. But I would say it would be easily comfortable just running Prime Sure-Footed on that. I haven't run into any limitations for that content running without Furious Javelin. It seems to perform about the same when I'm watching numbers. I don't know if Furious Javelin is like scaling the status proc, the resulting status proc that hits in the millions for the gas or whatever status effects were on that target before you hit him with Slash Dash. The damage overall seems about the same. So before I was with Furious Javelin, let's say I was in a fissure mission and I got double strength, I would be hitting in the like 200 some millions on some enemies, like lower armor enemies. With this, without running fissures, it would be hitting in like the couple of millions on those similar enemies, and then similarly before, hitting in like 50 millions if I was running Furious Javelins. It scales the initial hit, but I don't know if it scales the resulting status proc, which seems to hit about the same regardless of if Furious Javelin stacks are up. That's easy to control, something that I've tested sort of lightly, not gathering too much data, just not having this up while modded for it. So to get into the variation, this is also an improvement on the influence build. Less quality of life. Downside here is because you're pulling out Exalted Blade, can't really run Naramon on Umbra, so maybe even just showcase this first. So the only main difference here is because we're not worried about blind rage and negative efficiency and then stacking impetus, and we have these energy orbs as providing sort of close to Arcane Energize effect. What I was able to remove was Arcane Energize and then Fit Molt augmented. So there's a little bit of math that isn't the most convenient with Arcane Bellicose. So Arcane Bellicose is nice because it's a fixed quantity. On start of the mission, you don't have to worry about stacking or killing 250 enemies in order to get this bonus. But the downside here is that if you do the math for this is 24 or like about 25%, I think exactly 25% ability strength when you're in mission normally, and in comparison to like, let's say if you had Arcane Energize instead of these two orbs, technically if you use the ability strength orbs, you would, or ability strength Archon Shards, you get 30 strength from that. So it was like a little bit off in terms of the numbers, but I'll probably end up evaluating whether Arcane Bellicose is best in this specific scenario, running those energy effectiveness orbs for Archon Shards, or if like, let's just say Blade Charger or Fury scales better. It might even be because this is more of like you're just throwing status effects, throwing attacks at targets. This is where like something like attack speed. I don't like Arcane Strike because it's conditional. I just don't like conditional attack speed personally. I like that consistency for attack speed for mobility reasons, but this would be a viable option. So the nature of this is it frees up an Arcane slot, which I think overall is more valuable than two Archon Shards, even though we can really maximize something like the melee crit damage ones because we're running Wrathful Advance. The combination of these and Wrathful Advance isn't as insane as it is on Kullervo, let's say, where, you know, Kullervo, you're able to fit 5 of these and then get like 700 some percent ability to like total bonus crit damage. It's probably at the point of diminishing returns for that. This feels really good. This feels like it does nearly about the same amount of damage with very little compromise. So this is kind of my new recommendation for Excalibur. Running 2 energy effectiveness on energy orbs. I did do a lot of testing on just running 1 or running 1 and one of the violet orb conversion shards, like your equilibrium shards, and this just worked out so much better. Part of that might also be with how well something like Duplex Bond might proc, especially when you're running melee and you're keeping Tandem Bond up and killing Eximus units. So yeah, and as most of my builds go, just keep in mind these aren't like beginner builds. This is as min-max as you can get. I've done testing on pretty much every single individual little mod to really maximize it. Getting into the Exalted Blade setup again, I sort of showed this a moment ago, but the idea is that we don't need a lot of crit damage on this, so even running, if you still have an Umbra form, or at least one Umbra, which in this specific configuration you don't need it, but I think having these 2 mods is better because also you get a baseline greater than 50% crit chance. So instead of running something like Galvanized Steel, like sure, you'll get more crit damage from that. And with Wrathful Advanced, this probably performs overall better. I think this combination, just as a baseline, is more versatile. Also, if we're eventually going to Tau that might have sentient enemies that we need to kill, having these available to you is probably better than not. And then also increasing, like in this case, I'm doubling up on Toxin. Like, you don't need this in order to make the build work, but I think having that extra elemental damage scales better than extra crit damage, since we're able to sort of outsource a lot of that bonus crit damage to Archon Shards, which, you know, keep in mind, these are 74% crit damage per shard, so almost the equivalent to, you know, somewhere in between Gladiator Might and Organ Shatter in terms of how much you get from that. It's not insignificant, put it simply. So I'll showcase at least this. This doesn't change. If you do have an Umbra Forma on your Exalted Blade, just put the lowest cost mod in there. If you don't have Prime Fury, use Quickening. The other thing I guess I can go over that I've removed from this that was shown in my previous build is I was running Blood Rush. Not Weeping Wounds because it couldn't fit, but then I was also running Reflex. So I was running Galvanized Reflex, and one of the reasons and the idea behind this is that because of the way combo works with Slash Dash, if you don't have any initial combo, you don't get the stacks from Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds unless you have Exalted Blade drawn. If you have Exalted Blade drawn, you get it to 12 by 220. Whatever combo-based mods that you have equipped will work on Slash Dash until, let's say, you decast Exalted Blade. Once you decast Exalted Blade, that combo goes back down to 0, and then Slash Dash doesn't maintain its own combo counter unless there's initial combo, and this counts as that. The other way of doing that is with Crescendo. If you stack this all the way up using Exalted Blade to 12 by 220, then your Slash Dash just permanently has 12 by 220. You'll actually see it tick up and down when you cast and decast Exalted Blade. Tick all the way up when you cast Exalted Blade up to 12 by 220, and then when you decast Exalted Blade and you go back to where it's Slash Dash initial combo, then you'll see it creep back up to that. I don't think that's worth it. And the simple nature is that you don't need that extra crit chance from Blood Rush, so you're effectively taking up 2 mod slots to get 160% crit chance. In this case, you can just run sacrificial mods, get more elemental damage. This elemental damage is going to scale so much better with the really high base damage that Power Strength gives us. And then I think you get enough status chance between like Galvanized Elementalist and then 3 60-60 mods. So I have no concerns with this, like having to overtest this between like, Organ Shatter and all these. I think even the status chance alone worth it over that. Just to try to get it above 50%. Like when Galvanized Elementalist procs, this gets above 50% on status chance, and then you at least have a very likely chance to proc gas on each target. I will say this, it's been noticeable since I've been... So, I believe that is it in discussing some of the changes that I've made. I'll show a little bit of gameplay on this. Do my usual test mission. The other important thing, Lito's going to mention this, so it's Slash Dash. Slash Dash scales its multiplicative damage. If you remember before, there was a 25% multiplicative damage bonus per combo counter. That is still applicable, regardless of if it's like your equipped melee or anything like that. Something I've tested. You're able to, if you remove all the mods from everything, you're able to see it calculated out to like 25.3% when it's the math for it. So advantage here, obviously. So just out of habit, I'll still cast Furious Javelin or Radial Javelin, just out of habit. Got used to that. But you notice here up in the top, I have actually been proccing the Archon Flow. You'll see that. You can see the damage difference too. So when I when I'm slash dashing without Wrathful Advance versus when it's up. You can see it still kills even without Wrathful Advance up, and then as soon as Wrathful Advance is up, we're getting double exclamation. We're getting energy orbs from that cold damage. That's procced a few times. They're just procced right there again. The other thing to note too, and I'll show this, so with that reduced duration from running Transient Fortitude, you do obviously get less duration with Wrathful Advance, but if, let's say you're in a slash dash chain, I'll time it here. So we got 3 seconds, 2 seconds, start slash dashing. And notice it expired, but I'm still red critting. And it's because slash dash will snapshot that extra crit chance until it stops like the chaining. So once it stops chaining and you have to cast it again, just make sure Wrathful Advance is back up. With what I've shown in previous videos where I have Wrathful Advance reversed its functionality and then I have it a scroll down keybind. It's very easy to proc, very easy to maintain. It's like pretty much muscle memory. You could just set it up so that you just cast it right before you go to slash dash. Right there is an example where you don't get the knockdown and the extra status procs if they have overguard, because they can't get knocked down when they have overguard. So some XMS units you just have to hit twice, or what I like to do a lot of times is you do a block neutral with your dual lickers, and then whenever you go to slash dash into that target, you slash dash up to them. You can do this block neutral, and then it'll usually break overguard, especially with dual licker build that has magnetic on it. Really good job at stripping out that overguard, and then you're able to slash dash that target again to kill them. So you can probably see from my strength, power strength 445%, just because the way Wrathful Advance works, it's 1-to-1 with your power strength. There's 451%, so I've gotten 10 stacks with Arcane Impetus. As a reminder, that also that's 6% strength per stack and 3% efficiency. So then the efficiency of this build is relatively close to 100%. Minus 55 and then plus 30, resulting negative 25 or negative 25%. So you're not so efficient that you have to worry about dying because refresh spite, which is a problem if you're not running something like Blind Rage with this Arcane Impetus build and an Afflictions build, something I found out the hard way at level cap. And just because you don't run Furious Javelin doesn't mean you can't use your Radial Javelin. It's still, when you get these really high strength values, I guess I can show this. I think I have enough strength, energy to showcase this. It doesn't do terrible damage. Even in Steel Path, it's killing enemies, and especially with my companion hitting them, the CC applied from it is really good, and then it does decent damage. And if you're running something like Smita, like I usually do, when you start getting free orange crits, that does apply to it, and you notice when it does. And then when you start seeing those orange crits on Radial Javelin, it's like, okay, maybe it could be viable. Just give it enough strength, it could be viable. I'll show here. So like, the second hit on him after his overguard is stripped is guaranteed lethal. Status chance for it is insanely high. Right there, just even without Furious Javelin stacks, just basically one tapping. And my kitty blesses me. Thanks. So in comparison to just going full sweat with like dual lickers and mostly slash dashing, we're still getting a good amount of kills per minute. Thing to know, if you're unaware, from 1999 they did make it so where slash dash has shield immunity as well, so that's why like refresh spites on all these builds gives you that little bit of shield, so when you come out of it you have a little bit of immunity period, just enough to survive and cast it again. Downside, when you get too efficient, like you get too many not running Blind Rage with Arcane Impetus and you get 13 stacks, you just simply die because you can't cast your next ability fast enough. I'll show the dual liquor build one more time, since I don't believe I showed that. Sort of discussed that lightly. It's not as significant on this build because Nourish does really ramp dual liquor. This is more of a slash dash focused build. But if you were looking for, as someone who's played melee only since literally the beta, and really likes dual liquor as like a powerful melee weapon that doesn't require influence at all to function. Actually, I think it's worse with influence than what it is with vortex. If you wanted to buy one melee riven or one riven entirely to be able to run this anything that I do, it would be a dual liquor riven. I would avoid anything like this. This is such a unicorn, don't bother. But if you had to set a priority, because dual liquor's clouds don't scale off of condition overload, this is something I just tested in Simulacrum. I had someone helping me out. It doesn't apply to the clouds, so you want raw melee damage. By far, the best on rivens that scale with high dispo is something like just melee damage, and then critical damage doesn't matter as much for the clouds. The toxin damage does. So really, it's like melee damage and toxin damage, and then because dual liquor, if you're running like Wrathful Advance, and the crit damage is so high on dual liquor, the third stat would be crit damage. So I'd say for most people, these stats would be exactly what you're looking for. You can find these pretty cheap. It's a relatively niche on some of like what's actually best for a lot of melee weapons. I think the meta hasn't really caught. There's always sort of like a gap between what the market thinks is best and what is actually best because of how slow it is for the meta to catch up. I don't think a lot of people are testing these things. This scales by far the best by like about, when I did the math, it was like 8% higher damage because of all this extra elemental damage in comparison to running this. But that was with Furious Javelin, and the way Furious Javelin multiplies raw like melee damage and base damage. But if you were to run something like this, you obviously still need magnetic since you don't have a unicorn riven that gives you magnetic. So this mod just completely changes everything. This makes it so easy to run. If you wanted to run no riven, this is what I'd recommend. If you do have a riven, please have it have melee damage and then just replace prime pressure point. Just pointing this out. You know, the melee damage from a +3 -1 is higher than what prime pressure point gets. So it's like a riven for this thing is objectively better. It just has to do with the way the disposition works. If you wanted to, you could run some other niche stats, like status chance scales really well on dual Ichor. It doesn't scale well on rivens, but it scales really well on dual Ichor because of how high the base status chance is. And you don't need crit chance on it. That's kind of the sleeper way around this. If you're trying to maximize this, just avoid crit chance. You don't want to have other types of elemental damage because that'll really mess up the ability for you to run toxin and magnetic on it. I've experimented a lot with, like, I spent a long time rolling trying to get one of these, and it just doesn't work as well. The idea behind this is you throw it in and then you can get blast, magnetic, and toxin, but this just messes up the status weighing, even with like 200 some percent resultant status chance. This just messes up the status weighing where it's just not worth it. You don't get enough magnetic, you don't get enough toxin, it does less damage also. You don't need anything crazy like that. It really is probably one of the easiest rivens to just roll if you want to just buy it on rolled one and then roll it, and then get at least melee damage, and then maybe toxin, and then crit damage out of the prime. If you want a little bit more attack speed, that's another one for it. I don't like higher attack speed. The base attack speed's pretty high on dual Ichors already, so the plus 20% is even a little bit more than what I prefer. But that would be another one. And then obviously, like even combo duration, I would argue this is another one that I was testing with. Even combo duration's nice, especially if you're not running Naramon. Sometimes you can get away from that. So just in general, though, it's gonna almost any riven is gonna outperform prime pressure point with how high the disposition is. So just buy one, roll it a few times, even if it's a +2 with melee damage and toxin, or melee damage and crit damage, or status chance, or attack speed. It's gonna scale really well. So it doesn't need to be some crazy unicorn riven for that. Yeah, if there's any questions about any of this build, I'm going to be testing this. This is what I'm going to be running for a while now. Unfortunately, that puts my Umbra gameplay on the back burner, but ideally, there's a bunch of people that try it out and realize that, like, hey, you don't really need to worry about the bug with Umbra's passive when the only thing you're having to maintain for his entire build is Wrathful Advance for like 99% of content. I plan to actually run this. Next time I run level cap, I'm running this without Furious Javelin to see how really well it scales. I have a feeling when I'm at like 900% strength and Exalted Blade's just got like it's got like absurd base damage to it. You know, it's well over like 1500 base damage that it's not gonna care. It's not gonna care for maintaining those stacks. A lot of times you don't even have enough enemy density in something like Omnia Steel Path Void Cascade to get that many stacks of Furious Javelin. So why like add this incremental above thing when you can just send the base damage to the moon and pretty much equate it? And just simplifying the build. It completely, you can even make the argument in this setup with how easy it is to maintain Wrathful Advance. Like Umbra is probably just better overall. If you even wanted to subsume Wrathful Advance over Radial Javelin, you could do that, and then you have Radial Howl. And Radial Howl is better than Radial Blind for multiple reasons, including the ability to strip sentient resistances, as useful as that feature is. But you know, technically it's better, and then you get the sentience ability of Umbra if you ever want that, without having to sacrifice it with Warrior's Rest or the functionality of your build. It really is like probably the least compromise, where you could even make the argument that Umbra's probably better with this specific set. Any questions, feel free to leave them. Any suggestions that you have? I'm constantly evaluating the builds. It's pretty much what I do when I play this game. I just sit here and theorycraft more ways to absolutely min-max the heck out of Excalibur, and including various melee weapon types. If you didn't like Dual Ichor, Hate Incarnate's really good. Same with Okina Prime. This is really good if you mod it for just Toxin. But otherwise, it really doesn't matter. You can even run like Christmas Ghana with Influence build if you want, and then you don't have to worry about double dipping into Influence. You have a really powerful Exalted Blade that does like absurd base damage, and then you've got this genocidal maniac of an Influence build. So, or even your X-Wraith. Whatever floats your boat. The fact that this build doesn't rely on Exalted Blade means you can just equip primaries and secondaries and use those as well. I kind of was playing with that, but you know, it's just not my style. But this build does a very good job at just simplifying it to maximize slash dash. Yeah. Well, thanks for watching.